Welcome to the Disabled Podcast, starring your host, Christian Reitz.
Hot dog! Let's go!
Welcome to the Disabled Podcast, the show that incorporates disabilities with the magic of Disney. Welcome to episode number 5, entitled The Disney Cruise Line, Part 1. Be sure to use our hashtag the Disabled Podcast when sharing this podcast to all social media platforms. Again, that's hashtag the Disabled Podcast when sharing this podcast to all social media platforms. And now, here is your host, Christian Reitz. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Disabled Podcast. In this week's episode number 5, we're going to talk about the Disney Cruise Line. So this week, we're going to talk about some of the different ships, and some of the different things to do on board, like restaurants and all that. And then in the next part, we're actually going to talk about excursions that you can do, and some of the different itineraries you can do, as well as pricing of every cruise line ship from the Disney Cruise Line fleet. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what is the Disney Cruise Line, Christian? You talk about Disney World, and you've talked a little bit about your experiences in Disney World. So what exactly is the Disney Cruise Line? Well, I would describe it, if you asked me personally, I would describe it as basically it's Disney World and Disneyland. It's a Disney theme park on a cruise ship in the middle of water. That's basically all it is. Many of you know that Disney is a huge entertainment company, and this is just part of what they do to broaden their range of what they can do as a company. So not only do they have the theme parks, not only do they have Disney on Broadway, which we will do a separate podcast here in the future about Disney on Broadway, and I'll talk to you about some of the different shows that they do on Broadway and some of the different tours that they do. But this is just one of the biggest ways that Disney Cruise Line, Disney in general, really, the Walt Disney Company, has been able to broaden their entertainment. So as we all know, Disney Cruise Line operates so many different types of ships. Now, they currently offer 5 different types of ships, with 4 more set to join in the coming years. Now, as of 2024, all Disney Cruise Line ships are officially registered in Nassau, Bahamas. So, Nassau, Bahamas is a beautiful, beautiful place. Even if you've ever been on any other cruise ships, you would know that's just one of for cruise lines, that's just like the place to set port in. Now, it is expected that the Disney Adventure will be the first ship of the Disney Cruise Line to be registered also in Singapore. Now, I told you there was 5 Disney cruise ships currently, and that is the Disney Magic, the Disney Wonder, which I've had the pleasure of being on, the Disney Dream, the Disney Fantasy, and the Disney Wish, which is one of the more current ones that is actually is the current one that's been added here in the last year or so. Now, soon to be added are the Disney Treasure, which is expected to open up in December 21st of this year, and also the Disney Adventure, which is set to be sometime in 2025, and also the Disney Destiny, which is set to be open in November 2025. So now there are a few things on board that you can find that are really first, let me go and say for all you for all you people in wheelchairs, whether you're on crutches, because this is the Disabled Podcast. I have found personally, I went on the Disney Wonders some time ago, and I found that it's very accessible. So again, you don't have to worry about accessibility. It is all accessible. There are some water slides you can do. There's a lot of pools everywhere. For the younger kids, they have some children's programs. For the teens, they have some teen programs. And then the adults just get to roam around the ship. But there's also different themed nights that you could do with families. So depending on what ship you go on, there's a lot of things you could do as a family. So at night, they have what I loved when I went on the Disney Wonder, which is a lot of deck parties. So they have a lot of deck parties with the characters. And then, of course, they have the restaurants. So let's go and talk about some of the restaurants that some of these ships offer today. Now, of course, when you're talking about the Disney Cruise Line, you want to talk about top-notch quality, not just entertainment, but experiences and the food. Now, so let me see different ships. Again, every ship is different. For myself personally, I was on the Disney Wonder, which went to Alaska. Again, we'll talk about itineraries and places that they go later in the next episode coming up in a couple of weeks. But for me, what was cool that I love about some of the some of the restaurants that I've been to on board, and every ship does this cool thing. Your server on your very first night of your cruise. So let's say you're at Amaris Palette and you have a server. You typically would have two servers. What I loved about it was that you had those two servers every night of your cruise at the different restaurants that you were at. Now, typically, there are three different main dining restaurants. So for me, it was Animatus Palette. I think it was called Coco K as one of the other ones, and then there was another one that I cannot remember off the top of my head. But you mainly every ship has a different version of Animatus Palette. That was one of my favorite ones that was on this ship. And Animatus Palette does a few different things. So for our ship, the Disney Wonder, what the Animatus Palette was, and again, I just want to highlight just that one. If you have any other questions about any other of the dining options, you can always go to the Disney website, click on the Disney Cruise Line, and see all the different restaurants that they have to offer for the ship that you want to go on. So for Animator's Palette on the Disney Wonder, what I thought about was really cool was the experience. Of course, Disney loves to do top-notch entertainment. So not only is it top-notch food, but also in this restaurant, what was really cool that there was a top-notch entertainment show. So what would happen was you would go into the restaurant, you would sit down, and it would be all black and white around the room. Now, for every portion, so for the appetizer, the main course, and for dessert, there would be different moments. So what I loved about this restaurant was, it started off black and white, but as you went through dinner, if you looked around very carefully and you weren't messing around with the food or you weren't eating food, if you paid attention very carefully, you would actually find out that the room goes from black and white to color as your dining experience progresses. Then eventually, at the end of the dining experience, once you got to dessert, or just before you got to dessert, there would be this big show. Now, every portrait in the room, there's all these portraits that were on the walls. Those are actually really really cool experiences because those actually play video clips from different Disney movies around the room as you were eating. And then at the very end, your pal Sorcerer Mickey came out, danced around the room to, of course, the Fantasmic theme song. Now, I gotta tell you, that was one of the coolest experiences for me because it wasn't only just just a regular dining experience. Disney is all about entertainment. So that was just like a big show that you got to do. Now, of course, Disney, with their food menu and all that, very good menu options. They have obviously options for the adults, for the kids. There's always something that they have for every member of your family. And of course, for those of you that have food allergies, they are the best at making sure that those food allergies are met with caution, which is a big thing I know for a lot of people that go on different cruise lines. We have people who are maybe gluten free, so they have a lot of gluten free options, a lot of dairy free options. Again, Disney is the best at just stuff like this. So, what I recommend, and I always tell people this when they go on a cruise like this, is to always talk to your server on the very first night of the cruise about what your needs are for that whole week. And they will be more than happy to make sure that your needs are met and you can have the best experience possible. So again, no matter what ship you're on, no matter what experience you have, you're always going to get the best experience when it comes to entertainment and dining. So in the next episode coming up in just a couple weeks, we're going to talk about a lot of the entertainment on board as well as the different itineraries. And then I actually want to do, again, I said this was going to be a two-parter, but I'm actually thinking about doing a part 3 where I talk about the different excursions that I went on with the Alaskan cruise. Again, all of these experiences, everything I'm talking about, you will best know what I'm talking about if you go to the Disney website to look at all the different cruise ships, all the different experiences, all the different restaurants, and so on and so forth. Again, Disney is the best at the cruise line industry, and I know I'm not the only one that has that opinion. So I want to thank you guys for joining for this episode of the Disable Podcast. Hey, by the way, if you don't already know, there is a brand new merch store for the Disable Podcast. You might have seen on the Facebook page, if you follow the Disable Podcast Facebook page, that we just released a brand new merch store that you can go online and buy merch that is the official logo of the Disable Podcast. We're uploading things every week. These are brand new designs that are designed by my friend, Miss Randy Lorraine from You Are Too Beautiful Designs. You don't want to miss the Disable Podcast merch store. Go check it out and go get yourself some merch for the Disable Podcast. Well, that's all the time I have for this week's episode of the Disable Podcast. Be sure to join me in 2 weeks when I talk about part 2 of the Disney Cruise Line. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see ya
Real soon.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Disable Podcast. Don't forget to use the hashtag the Disable Podcast when sharing this podcast to all of your social media platforms. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see ya real soon.